doing over in front of you.
I don't want
Good evening. For those in the audience, what I'd like to do is open the work session, and the purpose of our work session tonight is addressing issues in the downtown area, and we'll go through an exclusion zone discussion, prohibiting skateboarding in city-owned parking lots, and then downtown park ranger updates and a couple other things. So that being said, what I think I'd like to do is start an exclusion zone discussion, and Matt and David, I think I'll let Matt, I don't know if you'd want to do it, or David, start about revisiting our exclusionary zone policy. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and start?
As you guys all recall, 2005, the city was actually probably pre-2005, 2004, 2003, there was a significant amount of incidents and criminal type behavior, nuisance type behavior that was going on downtown. Then Chief McFarland and some from our staff reached out to the businesses. The businesses were up in arms with what was going on downtown. The inability to really wrap your head around and actually have a tool in the officers or the city's tool belt, for that matter, to remedy the situations that were going on. 2005, the ordinance came about, the enhanced enforcement ordinance. It was essentially the district downtown that I spoke about a couple months ago with respect to calls for service. First to Fifth, Adams to Irvine. In fact, it included the city park even, up to Star Mill. So it was a rather large area where if a person committed a specific offense, a crime, a city ordinance violation that was enumerated within the ordinance, they would be excluded up to, I think, 90 days. It starts at 30, then it went to 60, then it went to 90. There was an appeal process, but it was separate from the criminal side. I believe maybe in the roughly 5 or 6 years that ordinance was in effect, that there was maybe one appeal of the ordinance, the exclusion. At any rate, historically speaking, about 2010, 2011, the city attorney at the time and then Chief Ron Noble talked about there was some case law that was coming about that caused the city some concern, referenced the whether or not the ordinance could be upheld in court. Since that time, there's been other cities that have enacted a similar type of ordinance, Bend being one, that has stood the test, I will say. I know David can speak reference to some case laws that he's reviewed, but since that time, there's been some ordinances that have come on the books to address the same type of things we're dealing with in our downtown. So we move forward from 2011 when the ordinance was repealed. I think there's no place in McMinnville that is as similar to downtown. It's high density, congested traffic, pedestrian. It's a tourist destination now. Market McMinnville, Destination McMinnville, I believe, is that the
Visit McMinnville.
Visit McMinnville, I'm sorry. It's been stood up. You're seeing an increase in tourism. And again, we struggle as a city, as a police department, dealing effectively with how to change people's behavior that sometimes don't want to change. So the ordinance discussions come up once again. David's done some research. Myself, David, the city prosecutor, and the municipal court judge have all spoken. I had a couple meetings, and they've been very productive meetings about moving forward. And I think everybody's on board with the comfort level that we can have an exclusion ordinance. It'd be probably a scaled-down ordinance in terms of the footprint of the ordinance. We spoke, and I'll share. We spoke it being essentially. I don't want to. Is it the? You've got all these.
It roughly matches Zone 1 of the Downtown Economic Improvement District,
Which is essentially second to fourth, Adams up to, I want to say, Galloway.
the railroad tracks.
Railroad tracks.
And that's a smaller footprint. I think it's more in line with where we are dealing with the issues. And it does protect the businesses, the residents within those zones. It does give the police department a tool to get the chronic offenders out of there for a time when, they need to, I think, respect what we and the business owners and the citizens expect downtown. So that being said, there is some traction with this, and I think it's worthy of further discussion and consideration. I recall in 2011 when this ordinance was repealed, again, our officers were somewhat disappointed at a level in that we don't have a tool to exclude somebody, to change behaviors. And I think when I mentioned that this was coming up on the docket again for the council to consider, and that there was some traction, I think the vibe within the office was good. We need something to control and get our hands and head wrapped around situations that we all read and know are been chronically poor behavior in the summertime, springtime, when school's out. And it's not just the schools, it's those that are 20, 25. And the nighttime crowd, we deal with bar fights a lot. I recall in my presentation a couple months ago, we talked about the call service that Captain Marks provided data for. Between 2012, when the ordinance was off the books, we've seen essentially a 38% increase in calls for service from those dates. We saw a 13% increase in crimes that were reported down there. So again, it gives us a tool in our tool belt to assist the district, the downtown district, the citizens in excluding those that don't want to play by the rules. So I'll leave the legal speak to David and kind of the system that we've come up with, or that is probably will stand the test of time through some sort of an appeal. So,
Okay, great. So as Chief Scales mentioned, we did take a look at the city's prior ordinance, some of the case law that has come down on this. And I believe that the cases that were primarily of concern at the time in 2011 time period were actually, it was a circuit court case out of Portland that was challenging the way Portland was managing their exclusion zone at the time. It wasn't a published Court of Appeals or Supreme Court opinion that we have that provided guidance for us at the local level, but there's just a general concern about, at that time, about the due process rights of folks being excluded from an area, as well as, issues related to the right to peaceably assemble and certain First Amendment rights that could be violated with the way some of these ordinances were being enacted. The city of McMinnville at the time chose to repeal its ordinance. Some of the other cities chose to maintain and carry on. To my knowledge, there has not been a challenge of the city of Ben's ordinance. They just they kept their ordinance on the books, and in 2015 actually expanded the boundaries of it to include a larger portion of their downtown. Same general list of offenses that were of concern for them. And then we also looked at the city of Ashland's ordinance. A key distinction between those is at what point does the civil exclusion go into effect? With Bend, it's at the time of arrest with a 5-day period to appeal before it goes into effect. With the city of Ashland, they did it a slightly different way, and it goes into effect after conviction for a certain number of offenses within the area. So at this point, I'm going to refer to the memo, the May 6th memo that was included in the council packet, because it walks through point by point 7 different policy areas that I think the council is going to want to consider and discuss prior to staff drafting an ordinance that we would then bring back for public hearing and consideration. The first is the geographic area that would be covered by the exclusion zone. Again, as Matt mentioned, the prior exclusion zone was a relatively large area. I think 1st to 5th covered the city park and as well as a significant portion of the downtown and beyond to the east. What we'd be proposing here is a more confined area. Would be starting at 2nd Street on the other side of the street, sidewalk, through 3rd Street up to 4th Street, would cover the parking lots behind the buildings, all of the 3rd Street businesses, the 1 block on each side radius of 3rd Street, so the side streets leading into it, but would not encompass City Hall, Civic Hall, the municipal court operations, any of the county offices, the courthouse and whatnot. So it is a more constricted area, primarily just the commercial district. So that's one policy area, though, for the council to consider is the geographic boundary and why we may want a smaller versus a larger area. Second policy issue gets into the debate between does an exclusion order go into effect at the time of arrest or only after a person has been convicted of a crime. There are some issues there that we debated at a staff level with the judge and the prosecutor about how we would administer an appeals process for a civil exclusion that dealt with the same issues that they were being prosecuted for in a criminal conviction. And it's a question of compelling somebody to participate in a hearing process where they might have to incriminate themselves in that civil appeal process in some way prior to their opportunity to be represented by an attorney before that same city jurisdiction in a criminal prosecution matter. And it was decided that even though the civil exclusion wouldn't take effect as quickly, the safer course of action would be to recommend that the exclusion only take effect after conviction of the crime. At that point, even if we're dealing with different burdens of proof where a civil exclusion is not a beyond a reasonable doubt type standard, it's more of a preponderance of the evidence standard, whether they committed the crime or not, the activity that they're being excluded for. Once they've been convicted of a crime, either pled guilty or gone through a trial process and been found guilty, that burden of proof has been met. And at that point, the exclusion can go into effect. We did, however, believe that it needed to be some type of appeal process, an administrative appeal process. There would be a list of offenses that would qualify for exclusion. If there was an administrative error and they were convicted of a crime that actually wasn't on the list, or if the conviction occurred outside of the exclusion zone, but they were still given an exclusion order, then they'd have an administrative appeal process to come in and say, wait a second, you got this wrong. We'd look at the facts and there'd be an opportunity for that review to go into effect. Rather than process those appeals through the municipal court, trying to maintain a separation between the criminal prosecution functions and judicial functions of the municipal court and the administrative appeal functions, we provided that recommend that the appeal be to the police chief first, and then if they were dissatisfied with the police chief's determination, they could come and talk to the city manager about that. The fourth policy area relates to providing a variance for folks for certain types of activities. If somebody lives within the boundaries of the exclusion zone, if they work within the boundaries of the zone, if they need to consult with an attorney in the zone, if they're attending church within the zone, protecting their religious liberties, or any other kind of valid basis that's not deemed to be detrimental to public safety, that at the time that the exclusion is issued, they can, even if they don't want to appeal it, they can request a variance at that time. And again, the process would be that those would be granted by the police chief, and there could be an appeal process to the city manager if they felt they weren't treated fairly at the first step in getting a variance granted. And that's point 5 is that those appeals for either denial of an exclusion appeal or a variance would go to the city manager. Number 6 talks about the time period that the exclusion would be in effect for. And what's being recommended here for discussion is looking at the person's history of violations or arrests, either for convictions for either violations or misdemeanors within the zone over the previous, say, 1, 2, or 3 year period, and then looking at a violation. If it's their first conviction for a violation within the boundaries, that it might be a 30-day exclusion. If it's a second violation within that 1, 2, or 3 year time period, or their first misdemeanor conviction, that it would be a 90-day. And if it's their second misdemeanor or a combination of 3 violations, misdemeanors, that it would be a 180-day exclusion. And that again is looking back from the date of the arrest for the date of the arrest for the current exclusion, looking back 2 years, how many convictions do they have or incidents did they have that they were excluded for previously within that time period, as kind of a graduated civil exclusion time. And then the final point is just to point out what is what is the enforcement mechanism if they violate an exclusion order? And the enforcement mechanism is that if they are found to be in violation of an exclusion order, then they can be arrested at that time and cited for criminal trespass. Same as if they've been trespassed from a business downtown, if they've been trespassed from a park. And this ordinance doesn't apply to the trespass process that we have in our city parks. This would be just for the downtown core. But somebody who's found to be violating a trespass order from the city park or a private business or under this ordinance could be found guilty of criminal trespass too, which is a Class C misdemeanor, the lowest level misdemeanor, but it's still punishable by fine and potential jail time. So those are the general policy areas. I guess just to tee up a discussion on that, and then we can go from there.
Let's, Larry, let's start with you. Your thoughts, feelings, comments?
If Chief feels that this is a tool that will help them to enforce and give the security to the business owners and public downtown, then I'm comfortable with it. But I don't want to restrict them too much, and I don't want to limit if they need a little extra space to work in.
Kelly?
Well, it looks reasonable to me. I would assume that the police chief would be able to work within these boundaries fairly well. Not too much confinement. It seems like there's a lot of latitude here.
Okay, Kevin, since this is a work session, let's go ahead and go with you.
It doesn't really seem clear to me, just to be clear, I am supportive, but I'd like some examples of what would be considered activities that would warrant this type of
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that was missing from the memo, I realized after publication. So I can read from you just quickly the list that we're looking again at the Bend ordinance as a model here. So there are crimes like assault, strangulation, menacing, harassment, disorderly conduct, reckless endangering, coercion, a list of different sexual offenses, endangering the welfare of a minor, any offense related to the possession, distribution, sale, or manufacture of an unlawful controlled substance or alcohol, possession or using of a weapon in violation of certain enumerated statutes, criminal mischief, graffiti, arson, or reckless burning, theft, littering, 2 or more citations for drinking at an unlicensed premises within 12 months, several different crimes related to ballot measure 91. We talked about public elimination, which is one of our city ordinances that we have issues with downtown from time to time. Those would be the types of either violations or misdemeanors that would fall under the statute.
Okay, Mr. Scott?
Having worked downtown for 25 years, right in the middle of Davis and Cowles on 3rd, I just know lots of activities are happening. The later in the afternoon and the day in the summers make it even that much more difficult. I would agree that if, the chief feels that by having the exclusion order could help in any way for the merchants that are downtown that are trying to do business. As a non-voting member of Visit McMinnville and just seeing how we're putting our tax dollars to work, $400,000, $500,000, and trying to bring people to this community, especially on the weekends and late at night when they're going to be out dining and walking the city. We need as much as we can to help keep it a livable but also a safe environment for those that are coming into town.
Okay, Remy, have you been here long enough to kind of get the gist of all this? And
Well, I read my packet, so I felt
Okay.
fairly versed coming in, although I apologize for being late, and I'm sorry to hear
No
that,
apologize needed.
missed the first part of it. The very nature of exclusionary zoning, the language itself gives me some pause. I also was going to ask about what was included in terms of the offenses, especially because from my reading in the memo, a person could be excluded after one offense. Is that correct? So the two off of what you just read off that give me the most concern are one, littering, and not that I want people to litter, but it's compared to a sexual assault, which was also on the list, littering, it seems rather broad. The other is public elimination. As we know, we have a large transient population that's living downtown, and we have limited facilities available. And while there are facilities available downtown, if you're standing down at, if you're at Circle K at 2 a.m. and you have to use the bathroom, and your the closest place to an available restroom is down at City Park, I'm concerned that the broadness of the language in this zoning ordinance would target a population of people, or could target a population of people beyond what the intention is. I understand there's serious concerns and business concerns within the downtown community, and I recognize there needs to be a real way to address that. But those things give me pause in terms of this.
Okay, thanks, Remy. Alan?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to get a feel for this actual zone. I know you said it, but it went over my head. What actually is
The bound-
covered? What are the boundaries?
So the boundaries that are being proposed here, recommended here, are from Second to Fourth,
Second to fourth.
and then from Adams down to the railroad tracks.
Second to fourth, is that both sides of the north side of Fourth?
It would
and
be
south side
the
of
north
Second?
side of Second to the south side of Fourth.
And, it's always been a problem downtown, like how do you give a violation to some young or old person that's vulgar and rude, I don't know how you do something like that. Is there a violation concerning that?
Is there a violation of,
Yeah, let's
Vulgar
say,
language or rudeness or?
Not for language.
not the language, so that could continue on.
But it would depend on whether it's disorderly conduct or not. If it raises to the level of disorderly
Okay,
conduct.
so if there's a confrontation of some sort, that's when it kicks in for a violation?
that would be correct, like if there's a fight or a disturbance or couple are yelling at each other, causing public alarm, yes, that would classify as disorderly conduct, which most likely would be enumerated an offense within the ordinance. So yes, you could be excluded for that. Now, I don't want to say everybody, again, we talk about our officers, we have to balance and provide some discretion. There may be those that don't get a civil exclusion off the first violation, but there are, we deal with chronic offenders. That's really what this ordinance is about, is about getting those that don't want to comply, that continually thumb their nose at the police, at the city, at the businesses, at the residents, to come into compliance. And so it's not on a blanket, black and white. I believe our officers have a lot of discretion.
And I guess I would counter that, in the way the ordinance is being recommended, that the exclusion would be issued at the time of conviction, and there would not be that discretion in the hands of the officers. And so,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, at one point, we were discussing it being issued by the officer at the time of arrest, and as our conversation
That's-
progressed and we moved to the conviction. So having said that, one of the areas of policy here for the council to consider is whether a first violation, you want that to result in exclusion, or whether they get, the first bite for free and it's only the second one that they start getting, they see an exclusion happen for, so.
Well, it's such a wide variance of different things that could trigger this with a conviction,
Mhm.
I mean, I could see a person littering 4 or 5 times before you probably said, gosh, you're just not getting the message, so we're going to exclude you.
Well, and I think-
Whereas sexual abuse would probably, I'd want them excluded all right off the bat, probably.
And that may be where the discretion of the officers come in, whether they're actually giving somebody a citation for a violation for littering on a first offense, or whether they're, exercising discretion at that level not to cite into municipal court, but to give warnings until it becomes a chronic issue.
That's a great point. That's a great point. The discretion starts early on in the process. They don't need to be arrested or given a citation. They can be educated. And with this, I would imagine that there's going to be a massive PR, or not PR, that's not the right word, but public education about what's going or would take effect if the council chooses to move forward with this.
And Matt, just to be clear, I mean, there would be two steps before you would get mandatory exclusion. One, you have to get cited. It's bad enough to get cited by a police officer. And two, you then have to get convicted. Would that be true?
Yes.
That's correct. That's
So
correct.
it's not like we get on a whim, kick somebody out. That's a two-step, very well-documented process.
Could I ask a question in regard to who is giving the exclusion? It's supposed to be, my understanding is you?
Well, I went back to the olden
You have
days,
officers
in
that-
2005. The court would order the civil exclusion. That would be the trigger point after the conviction. It would be the municipal
Court would
court.
make that determination?
I'm sorry?
The court would make the determination?
That,
Yeah, so the way that will work is on Wednesdays when we have municipal court, and we have the defendant in court, and they either plead guilty and are sentenced at that time, or if they go through a trial process and are found to be guilty through the trial process at the time of sentencing, then municipal court staff would issue them the civil exclusion paperwork at the time they give them all of the rest of their paperwork related to that conviction. And that's handled right here. And then they would have, I think we were recommending a 10-day period from the day they get that paperwork from court staff before the exclusion goes into effect. And that gives them the opportunity to stop in at City Hall and appeal or request a variance of the exclusion.
But just to be clear, the signature on the exclusion would not be Cynthia Noble.
Correct.
It would be somebody from the city. It is the city doing the exclusion to keep separate from the court process itself.
So it would be the police chief?
Depends on how we write it.
Because I'm trying to understand number 3 and who makes these decisions.
It would be municipal court staff, and it would be based on were they convicted of one of the enumerated crimes, and did that crime occur within the boundaries of the exclusion zone?
So who would sign off on it, the chief or the city manager?
It would
initially
be municipal court staff. The chief isn't here for court, and the idea is that they get the paperwork before they leave court that day. So it would be somebody on municipal court staff.
So the issue is
That has
it's
the right-
automatic exclusion. Once there's a conviction, then that's a simple process. The staff can sign out the exclusion zone, or they can just notify the individual that as a result of your conviction, you are excluded. So it's not Cynthia Noble.
Makes sense.
It's not the judge saying you're out. It is city policy that as a result of A, B will happen. Does that make sense?
I know, but there's a lot of discretion here because there's a lot of different possible penalty or possible things they could do wrong. I mean,
Once
like I
you get a
say,
conviction-
littering versus sexual abuse are quite very wide,
But once you get a conviction for this list of offenses, once you're convicted, you're excluded.
regardless of whatever.
If you're in that list,
So
once
you've
you're
littered
convicted,
once,
depending on how we write it up.
Yeah, the idea would be at a policy level, the council would decide, and it would be written into the ordinance for,
We're not mandating sentencing here, I mean, the judges will have.
yeah, and it's not a criminal sentence. It's not part of their criminal
Civil,
sentence.
it's a civil
It's a
sentence.
civil exclusion from the zone.
And what happens if you violate the civil exclusion?
Then that's the criminal offense of criminal trespass.
okay.
What's the penalty for that?
It's a Class C misdemeanor, which I think the maximum fine is $100 and the maximum jail is 30 days.
30
wanna
days,
say.
I believe.
Oh, not a lot.
No, and,
Not do something.
you know, I would encourage any of the counselors that haven't had the chance to sit in on municipal court some Wednesday morning. It's an interesting process. But we have, we have folks that are coming through the city's municipal court system every week that are committing any number of these crimes. And very few of them, well, not very few of them, but not all of them are happening within that downtown core. Those folks would not be given that exclusion. It'd only be the ones that were committing those crimes and convicted then, found guilty within that downtown core.
So would it be safe to say that this is just an added
Incentive
arrow
not
in
to
the
do
quiver
it.
here? So they could be criminally sentenced for something
Yeah.
and then also on top of that excluded.
Yeah, these are folks that are already going to be issued, they'll have been convicted, they'll have been sentenced to pay a fine, to perhaps perform community service work. They may even be getting jail time issued as a sentence by the judge. And this is an exclusion from that zone that's essentially an additional sanction, but it's one issued civilly by the city, not criminally by the judge.
So hypothetical, if they get 90 days in jail for something, would the exclusion take place while they're in jail? I mean, they can't violate while they're in jail, but.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So have other cities seen that this actually deters repeat behavior of these violations, or does it relocate? I mean, it deters it in that area, but if you have people that are not, that are chronic offenders, as you said, then is this exclusion stopping that habit of being a chronic offender? It's not the
I
right
could-
word,
I
but,
can
or
tell
is
you,
it just
Remy,
moving it?
My initial experience with the ordinance in 2005 when we did that is, to answer your question very simply, is no, it didn't really relocate the behavior someplace else, because the simple reason is they wanted to be able to congregate downtown where a lot of their friends are. So if they were cited originally under the original exclusion zone ordinance, you didn't have those people then going someplace else and congregating because they wanted to be down here. So if I remember it, we didn't see take a group of people that were excluded and they moved somebody else out, they moved someplace outside the exclusion zone.
I would agree,
Bottom
2000.
line here too is we're creating a fence basically around this asset that we have, that we've invested a great deal of money in. So even if it's a deterrent, even if it moves people elsewhere, the point is protecting that corridor from this type of behavior. I think that's worth the effort.
Just a couple comments I have, and David, this is a technical comment. The EID Zone 1, does it follow the same boundaries as like the north side of Second Street, south side of Fourth Street? So we're not saying if the EID was the south side of Second Street here, we're not changing.
Correct.
So it's the exact same zone as EID Zone, is Zone 1. Okay, the only things I read of this, I think, I understand the intent of the ordinance, and I think a lot of time the intent is to discourage the abusive behavior. Is it going to stop it all the time? No, but it's to discourage it, and I think you can go a long way of discouraging it. The only thing I had that I kind of questioned in the ordinance, and I'm not so sure if there's a better way of doing this. There are certain things that get you a exclusion from the zone, the exclusion zone, such as we talked about rape, we talked about assault, we talked about those things that are covered under a criminal code. And I don't know if we're better off if the criminal code, if we're better off saying, okay, if you're downtown, you violate these particular statutes of a criminal code, you're going to be excluded, and not list them all individually within this ordinance, because there may be other criminal code things we want for behavior, and I don't know that we might want to exclude people for, but the minute you actually go in, and I think there was the 7, wasn't there, David? There was the assault, whatever the conditions were. Well, if those are laid out in this code for an exclusion, I think we could easily say if we want staff to, we can leave it up to David and staff, if we want them to create an ordinance for our review, we could say that, something about if you create other criminal, if you do, other criminal activity, then you are automatically, just like exclusion. I'm just not in 3 or 4 different places listing all these, like the exclusion zone, listing like rape, because rape is a criminal statute. Is a crime anyway, so why are we listing that specifically in this ordinance? So if we say if you're convicted of one of those type of crimes, then you're going to be
So you're suggesting maybe we should cite a statute?
some kind of a statute
So-
instead of listing them all individual in this ordinance. So Matt, do you understand what I'm trying
Well,
to
I
say?
think what you're saying is instead of enumerating every crime, you would say kind of a blanket, but there's, oh, shoot, I'm drawing blanks. There's things that you could be arrested for, oh my gosh. Serving alcohol to a minor.
Uh-huh.
That's not enumerated in the offense. Okay, so you wouldn't be excluded from there. There's also,
if you're serving, should you be excluded if you
a
work?
majority of this is, of these crimes, these ORS that are listed are behavioral related. That's what Ben, the city did us, Ashland, they've done this, they're based on behavioral type of events.
If we have to list them individually, that's fine, but that's what I was getting at. Is there some way we could put in there and your wording matters, or wording that said, if they're based on behavioral type of criminal activity, then.
Well, because then you're dealing with I'll be candid with you, there's sex crimes with animals. That's a behavioral type of crime that would fall, that's a really broad brush.
Yeah, I think the issue is now you start the possibility that you could use this to ban just about anybody. I think that's why you see things listed in exclusion zones as a balance to, you want to keep the downtown safe, but you need to balance that against the constitutional rights of an individual and not go overboard on this. And I think one of the tools that both we've seen Ashland and Ben use successfully is to spell it out.
And I don't have a
so
problem with that.
it's that balance.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I was just trying to think if there was some easier
Yeah,
way of getting it done. But
So-
we'll leave that, I don't care however staff decides is the best way to enumerate that in an ordinance. I think, Martha, under the exclusion zone ordinance, we want to talk, I guess, a separate subject about the skateboarding the city owns. So what's everybody's feeling regarding staff doing an ordinance and coming back to us for an ordinance review? I think it's necessary.
which
I think
topic?
it's necessary myself. I think Remy had good points. What do we exclude? But if it's based, to me, the difference between this one and our last one is this is actually a little bit different because it's based on a conviction and it isn't based on just giving them one. So that's innocent until proven guilty. If you're convicted, then you can get excluded. But if you're not convicted, nobody could just walk up to you and say, here's an exclusion thing, so.
And I guess that I would ask if folks are comfortable with the boundaries that we're talking about, if they want to see this fleshed out a little bit more in terms of a matrix of what levels of crimes or offenses would result in, either a warning the first time, or it would take 2 or more convictions to get an exclusion from the zone. You want us to do some more work on that and put that forward based on comments we've heard tonight?
I guess I don't want it to get too complicated.
I
want
kinda
to
like the
keep
way
it
the memo
fairly
was written.
simple, so do it on
I
the
think the
zone.
memos just kind of find the way it is. I don't know that you need to spell it all out. You might put some examples and maybe illustrative, to illustrate these are some examples or something like that, but I don't see any real reason to spell all of the offenses out. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
Okay. I think there is a benefit to listing, that there are any number of crimes that we haven't included on this list. A couple that come to mind that come to Muni Court all the time are misdemeanor driving while suspended.
Mhm.
Okay? If somebody happens to get pulled over in the downtown
They
on
shouldn't
Third
be
Street
excluded, yeah.
for driving while suspended, that's a misdemeanor that then occurred within the zone. Is that something we want to then exclude them? Driving under the influence is another one. Those are two that are regular crimes that are cited in the municipal court that could, just by virtue of happenstance, be in the downtown
Yeah,
core.
well, I
We
take
might not
it
want to
this,
exclude
this
them.
list you came up from is basically discussions with you guys.
Well,
and
and this came from the
judge
City of Bend ordinance.
Bend.
Yeah.
And
Examples of what has worked in
Yeah.
other cities.
Yeah.
I think, what is the council, Alan, what do you and Remy and Scott, what do you feel about them doing actually an ordinance we can come back and take a look, at? And then we can look and see if there's anything specific about that ordinance?
Yeah, I guess I'm not convinced that it's going to improve public safety downtown yet. I agree with the boundaries. I think that geographical area is good, whatever we do, but I look at all the administrative time spent enforcing and court time and everything like that. Is it really going to make it safer downtown?
Martha?
I'm in limbo there. I don't.
Okay, let's have Martha weigh in on this.
I know, that's why I brought up the issue of the downtown nuisances. That seems to be the biggest discussion point for business owners downtown, and apparently there's not much we can do about it being rude and obnoxious and crude. But I don't know where the safety's going to come in, other than expelling a few people.
Well, I'm going to give two examples. One is the personal experience by our own police force when we had an exclusion zone, that they felt it was an effective tool. And two, Bend has found and has documented it to lessen these types of crimes in their downtown. Documented.
Less than what?
They dropped, the reason they have this in Bend and expanded it in 2015 was it has decreased the level of these crimes in their downtown. So they've proven that it does work. I don't have Ashland's numbers, but I know that they've just recently implemented. But Bend does have the numbers to show it decrements these crimes in the area where it is implemented.
I don't know if it's not, Alan, if it's not having the exclusion zone now when we did away with the ordinance, but I can tell you that the last probably 2 to 3 years, spending a lot of time downtown, I've definitely seen an uptick on some of that behavior that did not exist when we had the exclusion zone. So I think it's more of a deterrent than it really is, because we're talking about, most people adhere to it, some people aren't going to adhere to it, so. Okay, Remy?
Well, I still have some reservations. I'm sympathetic to the business community, which I see reflected in the audience tonight, and I'm aware that this is an important issue for our downtown businesses. And with that, and with the information that this has been successful, I'm taking all of that in. I still have hesitation on two main points. One is that I wonder if there isn't some, and this is a wonder because I don't know exactly how the process goes, but if there's not some redundancy, could we not go for, if you have chronic offenders, for harsher punishments, or, if somebody's already in the criminal justice system, that this is being so location-specific, I have a big question mark out there about that. The other, and you had addressed this, but the other thing that really comes to mind is the constitutionality of it. And are we treating all people equally, including convicts? And certainly, if you're saying that somebody that's committed a sexual assault can't be in downtown, if you're saying they committed that crime downtown, therefore they can't be there, versus if they committed it elsewhere. And that is, and although it was addressed, that continues to give me a lot of concern. I want to support our downtown businesses, I want to support our police force, but I have a lot of reservation. I have a lot of reservation with the language of this and the broadness of it. So that's where I am.
Okay. Scott?
The location of the boundaries, I feel very comfortable with. I feel if we could put the offenses down in the ordinance, I'd feel comfortable with that. I think it could be a starting point, and I think, knowing the relationship we have with our police department, the downtown association, I think we could tweak it if it needs to be tweaked at a later date, but I think it's long overdue for those that violate the law. And I've seen our police interact downtown, and the first time offense is not what we're looking for. We're looking for chronic. And I've seen chronic things downtown that put people at jeopardy. And our tourists, our vendors, our shoppers, and that's the last thing we want to. There's just this behavior sometimes where individuals are thinking more of themselves in their little groups downtown than they care about anybody else's rights. And they overstep those bounds, and they may think it's funny, or they may think it's the right thing to do within their group, but it's not the right thing to do in a civilized situation where we want this to be an open community for people to freely come and go without safety situations. And again, allowing our trained police department to be more effective of what they do. And if they say this makes them more effective, and I have trust and judgment in what they do, I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Didn't we already hit us already? We're
Yeah,
good?
well, no, we're just final comments.
Oh.
What I'm trying to do is see if there's a
I think-
consensus that we go ahead and have it brought, at least an ordinance prepared to brought back to us that we could actually take a look at. And that's what this is
It doesn't
about.
sound like there's a consensus, but I think we should move forward with it and have see the ordinance. We're going to have a public hearing on the ordinance. I think we should include that as part of the process. I think this is a valid idea that it's been presented. We've used it here in the past with success. We've seen it done elsewhere with success. I don't see any reason not to move forward.
Okay. Kelly?
I agree. I think we should move forward and have the ordinance prepared, and obviously it has some successful aspects in other areas, so I don't see why we would be less likely to have that.
Okay. Larry?
All in favor of moving forward. Our police need something like this.
Okay, Remy, so you will is it okay to have staff do the ordinance and we can come back and talk about the actual contents of the ordinance and what we might want to see for you to attend the
Well,
table?
it's not up to me.
No, but that's to say, but I think, since we're not actually voting, what I'd like to do is by consensus, at least to get a ordinance brought back in front of us. Okay, hearing none, why don't we go ahead and
She's abstaining.
work on staff. I know. Thank you for your great input, Remy.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, while we're on this subject, and I don't want to take any more time on this, but I know we've talked about this in the past, and I think with this zone, I think it's an appropriate time to bring it up again, but having a non-smoking zone downtown in that same district, I think would be a good move. I've spoken with some vendors in this last week, and they were wondering, whatever happened to that? Are we ever going to bring that up again? And so I just think this would be a good time to do it, if we're going to do it.
I've heard a lot about that. Go ahead, Bartha.
Right now, we talked about this over a year ago with the MDA, and there's one town in Colorado that's implemented it. There's been small cities, a couple of them in Oregon that's implemented no smoking in a particular area. What we have found that to be very successful is active engagement, and in Longmont, I can't remember which one in Colorado, Longmont, it was 100% backed by the businesses, 100%. We're not there. The MDA, now that they're under new board membership, and Rebecca's here, has talked about that once they get the EAID and some other things passed, they would like to engage the downtown to see about gaining traction and momentum towards bringing up a discussion
Yeah.
on smoking, non-smoking downtown, but I don't believe we're there yet.
I understand the concern, and I've heard that already. But I think there's a correlation between those who are standing in the way of this and those calls that Chief Scales has brought up. And I don't think that the rest of the downtown should be held hostage by these holdouts that we already know are causing a great deal of trouble downtown.
I can tell you, Kevin, from my own personal information, and I'll go back to what Martha said about Longmont, what they found out is if the law enforcement actually did more of enforcement of the minor in possession, that did away with about 80% of the problem. My concern, and I agree with you, Kevin, you know, not being a smoker for 40 or 35 years now, is that what frustrates me about it is I don't think it should be allowed either, but what frustrates me about it is because we force people that would normally smoke inside, outside, that was my issue, because we never had this problem when people were able to smoke inside, you know, in the business, some of the businesses. Then when they were forced outside, now we have what we do. But I agree with you, but maybe that's something we can work on, and I think Rebecca's here, and she's hearing what we want to do and get what the business
Yeah.
area wants to do.
We're just the businesses right now, you're gonna have several very vocal fights.
Yeah.
And I think we can.
I'm
we
welcome
can
to the
help them.
fight.
Yeah.
I don't think we
anybody-
have to fight if we let them discuss it and perhaps come to
Okay.
some
Thanks.
give and take.
I don't, let's move on. One of the things I wanted to, I know we had a couple more things to go over in our work session, but we set an hour for the work session, but I would like to go over maybe we can, I think there's good information on the downtown park ranger update, maybe have, come back, Dennis, and maybe instead of have you do that tonight, maybe have you do it next council meeting so we can move on. But Martha, I just want your thoughts just for a minute on the city-owned parking lot excluding skateboarding, because that kind of ties in with this exclusion area.
And this one I think will be easy, but you know, I never can tell with y'all. We've had several complaints of near misses with skateboarders and cars, in particular in the Second Street parking lot right across here on Cowles. And after taking a look around, you know, OMI does not permit parking in their skateboarding in their parking lot. And there's just enough, it's tight, it's congested in many of our parking lots, but more importantly, it's the factor of folks backing out. It just represents a distracted driver trying to see things, not seeing a skateboarder in the back. So for safety concerns in this particular area, and it would be a relatively easy thing to do, is for city parking lots where we have that congestion, where we have people backing up and moving out, is to ban skateboarding and rollerblading inside our lots itself. And this would just apply only to city parking lots.
Question, and I do have a problem with city parking lots in general, but for the parking lots that are in question, and we know what those parking lots are,
Second Street.
the Second Street, could those actually be included in with the ordinance regarding the exclusion? Because we used to exclude people that were, kids that were skateboarding all the time. And
Different thing, the exclusion, I would keep those apart, because skateboarding, it's a safety, and you're going to exclude it. You don't have to be convicted of skateboarding. The exclusion zone, you got to be convicted first.
Well-
So two totally separate, different things. And so I would put it, right now, we have an ordinance that prohibits skateboards in different areas. I would add it to that ordinance, that's where it belongs.
Maybe we need to look, why don't we plan on maybe next week or next meeting, Martha, so bring that ordinance in front of us so we can take a look at that.
You currently have it, it's in the
I know it's
municipal
in the-
code, and you have it
right.
in your packet tonight.
But I don't want to waste too much more time going into this, because I do agree that is probably a good thing. Kelly?
Could we do a quick consensus, or just a quick round on how people might feel about it, just out of curiosity?
Sure, since it is in there. Larry, let's start with you.
I'm all in favor of it because I've had a few near misses myself, and I think that we just need it for safety in our public parking lots.
I totally agree.
Kevin?
I'm kind of split on this one, honestly. I think
too.
Recreational, like people skating and doing tricks and stuff in there is one thing, but I think people who are using it as a commuter device, I don't have a problem. If they're passing through, I think it should be okay, but if they're they're recreating in there, I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and honestly, I did not look at the full ordinance myself, but I had some questions, so that's why I'd like to hold it over to next one so I can look at.
It's just that they travel so fast.
I mean,
and
but that is for a
Thing with
defined, that is defined
Bicyclists are the
parking lots in
same
certain-
problem. I mean, you have to practice some self-preservation if you're commuting through a zone.
And to be honest, I mean, that's where normal skateboarders driving through and people backing into them, that's what we're seeing. So what, it's a very, to keep it simplistic, it's city staff parking lots, no skateboards. That's what we would bring back, that's what we'd bring back to you next time, is a change to the existing ordinance on prohibitions of skateboarding in the downtown on sidewalks. We would add, in addition to downtown sidewalks, we would add, and city parking lots.
But city parking lots in a certain designed area, because city parking lots are parking lots in city parks or city parking lots, and I don't want to go out to Wortman Park and not allow it, but,
We can,
Quick consensus.
okay, let's go on, Scott.
I'm up for it.
Well, I almost borrowed a friend's longboard to come here tonight, but then I would have been really late, so.
You've been fine.
You know, I'm not split, but I do think that, if it is going to be expanded, I understand the reason for the expansion, but then I do think it warrants that, should it also include bike traffic, et cetera. But there's a real, I mean, if you're talking about somebody moving quickly through there, but yeah, I am not against excluding, a safety hazard from our staff parking lots.
Okay, Alan?
So what parking lots, I'm all for it, if I knew what the parking lots were.
we'll bring them out and give you a map, but it's the city parking lots that is second, behind Harvest Fresh, all the areas that we patrol currently for parking in the downtown.
So
About the
basically,
They're the
they're almost
smallest
like,
ones.
almost like EID zone
About the
one,
parking
basically,
structure.
the same.
We'll spell the parking lots out when we bring the ordinance.
How about the parking structure?
Yeah, how about the parking structure, you said?
We have not seen, we can do it in the parking structure, that would be a parking lot.
I'm just saying, if it's city-owned, if it's gonna be
Yeah.
all of them, right?
And it makes sense, because you got the same thing, people pulling in, backing out.
Going down the ramp.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we, then if it's okay, we'll have staff bring that one back for us to look at, also with the definition of what lots we're actually talking about to look at. Okay, and I hate to put you off, but we're going to move, not that you mind at all, right, Dennis? So what we'll do is next week, then maybe just during the regular meeting or 2 weeks from now, if you can give us just a little update on the park ranger program. And if you're not available, the police chief certainly can. Okay. Do we have anything else? I think David, then, and Martha, we're going to have two different you're going to be working on two different ordinances to come in front of us? Sound like that? Okay. Thank you, Martha and David, and thank you, council. A lot of discussion to go through, and we'll see the ordinances next week. Okay, we're a little bit late, but what we'd like to do, that's the only thing we had on our work session tonight. So what we're going to do is go ahead and go into the regular meeting. So it's now 7:10. I'd like to call order the May 10th, 2016 meeting of the McMinnville City Council. And just a reminder that since this is being broadcast live streamed through KLYC and being taped for broadcast on MCM on both Frontier and Comcast, that we ask you, if you have a cell phone, that you go ahead and silence your cell phone at this time. If you need to make a call or send or receive text, we ask you to go out into the lobby of the building for the courtesy of others. So that being said, why don't, Kelly, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kelly. This is the time when we ask any citizen who doesn't have anything else on the agenda they want to talk about, they can come and talk to us. There are a couple things. If it's already on the agenda, of course, as I said, we ask you to wait till that agenda item. If the city's currently in a matter of litigation, we will not be able to talk, the council will not be able to discuss that issue. If it's a quasi-judicial land use matter or a matter scheduled for a public hearing at some future date and you want to testify, we'll let you know that, and so you won't have to testify on that because we would not be able to receive your testimony. And then again, as mayor, usually very seldom we have to do this, but I reserve the right to limit anybody's comments. Dave, your comments are limited. Sorry, no, limit anybody's comments. So I know that Mr. Hogberg would like to speak to us, and then we'll go to others. So David, why don't you come up first?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Dave Hogberg. I am the chair of the Yamhill County Parkway Committee. I live at 1395 Northwest Willis Road here in McMinnville. And I wanted to take a couple of minutes to bring you up to date on some things happening with respect to the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. And then I'll just forewarn you of a request that we're going to be making at your budget committee hearing. But several things are going on right now. And one of the things is that we're working very hard as a Parkway Committee and a number of others in advancing the next piece of the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. That is the portion that goes from Highway 219 up to the base of Rex Hill. That's really critical to the functionality of the first phase. It's a part of the project, and it needs to move forward and happen. And so we're trying to suggest that maybe the stars are aligning in a way that can help move that forward. We continually to work on opportunities to acquire right-of-way that may be threatened because of potential development in the Newburgh area, in the area back behind Providence Hospital and along the golf course. And so that's happening. And in fact, we've got letters from about 7 or 8 of the state legislators. We've got letters of support from the Mid-Willamette Valley Area Commission on Transportation. The Marion County Commissioners have now weighed in, which is very helpful. They see that if we don't finish the next phase and the highway ends, the bypass ends at 219, the impact and the potential diversion of a lot of traffic over across 219 onto McKay Road to the Aurora Donald interchange. So that's an important bit of support that we've garnered. Then 2 things have happened that are going to happen. One is that the Congress, mainly through the efforts of our lobbyist, has, in their new federal transportation bill that's going for the next 5 years, included a category of high-priority corridors. There are 2 in Oregon and about 70 in the United States, and the Newburgh-Dundee bypass is one of those 2 projects in Oregon corridors that's received that high-priority designation, which makes a lot of opportunities for funding over the next 5 years. And then we know that the Oregon legislature is working to try to come up with, and the governor is suggesting we need a major transportation bill in this next legislative session. We spent a lot of time in the last session, the short session, bringing people up to date in the legislature about this project, and we'll, of course, be working hard on that in the next legislative session with the leadership and others to finish this next big phase of the project. It's about a $200 million bill, but brings enormous benefits. So that's where we are, and I'm happy to answer questions. I would say one thing, we're going to be working on 2 fronts, one in Congress and one in Salem, and I haven't worked on Salem since this morning and Congress since this afternoon in terms of our lobbyists, and they are an incredible investment. But we're going to be coming to you, as we are to all of our other partners in that funding effort, asking that for this next year, parties double what their contributions are. We think it's been a great investment in what we've done and what we've accomplished. In McMinnville's case, for example, you would go from $18,000 to $36,000, but the return has been pretty spectacular when you look at it. But I didn't come here to lobby that. I know you've got a hearing on the 18th, and I'll be here for that. But I would answer questions if you have questions or thoughts about, what's happening and what do we think will happen next on the bypass project.
Okay, what I'd like to do is maybe for a few comments, first turn it over to Larry. Both Larry and I serve on the Yamhill County Parkway Committee. So Larry, any comments you may have for the council?
Well, no, not in what Dave has said, because he's done a fantastic job, and we have so much potential ahead of us for increased funding that we need to get our lobbyists out there and make our voice heard, because it's just going to get more expensive if we allow the development to happen on the other end before we purchase the property.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I know as mayor also serving on the Yamhill County Parkway Committee, councilors, I think what concerns me the most is the acquisition of the property between 219 and Rex Hill. That is, now there's some active property acquisition that is trying to be done out there, and we will never see the finish and now being designated as a high priority corridor nationwide, as David said, I think it's critical the next probably 2 to 3 years, probably at least specifically this year, that we be able to step up our lobbying effort and make sure that our lobbyists have actually the people they need and the funds they need to make sure that we get allocated that money that we're entitled, that we will be getting through the high priority corridor. So, any questions, Alan?
No, just thank you for the information. You're talking about a $200 million deal, roughly. Is that what you mentioned?
How much is what?
200 million?
Yeah, it's about 200 million for right-of-way and to construct, it'll be another 2 lanes facility at this time from 219 to Rex Hill. Won't include that full all-directional interchange on Rex Hill, which is just huge and extraordinarily expensive, but will get us to 99W as opposed to using Springbrook Road. But I would just point out, it's not different, unlike when the state built the 217 in Portland. I think that's the number, through Washington County. And, when they first built that, they didn't have interchanges at Hall or Murray or Walker or a number of those roads, and then came back later and put those in as the funds became available.
How does it divvy up with the federal and state funds?
I don't know that I can answer that, because in the particular project we're in now was about 182 million of state funds, a lot of local funds, as you know, and about 30 million of federal funds. This time we have a bigger opportunity to get a lot of federal funds with that federal act that puts this as a high priority corridor. Senator Wyden was extraordinarily important in making that happen and speaking on when that bill passed for high priority corridors. He specifically talked about the Newburgh-Dundee bypass on the federal level.
Great, thank you.
Remy?
No, thank you.
Scott?
Again, Dave, thanks for your never-ending passion on behalf of the bypass. I don't know how many years it's been, but you're sitting at the table tonight like you did maybe 20 years ago, so thank you.
I think it was 28, but that was
8, I think, who's
Yeah.
counting, right? Larry?
Already.
Okay. Anybody else, Scott?
I'd like to
Sheila
say
Kelly?
something. So you're saying it's 200 million to both purchase the property and to complete this particular phase. Is there any redundancies or things that we've already done that are gonna not work out because of this?
Excuse me, it's hard with all the background noise in my.
200 million to complete this without the interchange, is what you're saying. That will purchase the property and it will complete the connections.
And in engineering, et cetera, yes.
To get to 99W, okay. All right, yeah, no, I'm all for it. I mean, I think we could certainly go with providing more funds to help you with the lobbying.
Kevin?
Since I'm not going to be able to attend the budget meeting next week, I just asked the question now. With doubling the lobbying effort, what would be doubled in effort? Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? I'm imagining that we're billed hourly for your time, so you want to double your effort.
And in fact, our lobbyists do pay by the hour. And the reason for the doubling is because in the past, we would be mainly, our efforts had been in the federal level. Then with the Joint Transportation Act and 192, it was all on the state level. Well, this year is kind of a good storm because we have the opportunities on both the federal and the state level. So we're going to be running lobbyists in both areas, and that's why it's pretty much a double.
Okay, thank you. That was.
Yeah.
Any more questions of Dave? Not, David, we'll see you next Wednesday night then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, would anybody else like to speak to the council? Mark, come on forward, and again, do your thing up there. Sign in and state your name and address and.
Mark Davis, 652 Southeast Washington Street here in McMinnville. This is a comment left over from the last meeting. Ran a little late, so I didn't think you wanted me to hop up during the affordable housing discussion, but I'd like to make a quick comment about that. I'm glad to see the city moving forward. Obviously I wish things would happen faster, but, I understand the realities of, taking a measured approach. So. But one opportunity I see in this process that I'd like to encourage you to consider is that, I think this is tied to ultimately an expansion of the urban growth boundary. I know nobody wants to hear that, and we've gone through a lot over that, but affordable housing is part of the urban growth boundary process, and you're clearly making a good effort here. And I'd like to encourage the city, when you start discussing the land use part of the affordable housing program, to bring in the land use groups. I mean, the city has had a contentious relationship with them over the years, and this is an issue in which they basically agree with the city of the importance of it. And I think it would be an opportunity to build some bridges and maybe develop a little different relationship, so that the next time when we get ready to go do the UGB process, that we've, built a little trust. I'm not saying everybody's going to agree on everything or anything like that. I'm not implying anything like that. But I do think that the idea of a process here that's not as contentious would be a good start. Thank you.
Any questions from Mark, comments? I know, Mark, the presentation I was at, and I think you were there at the community plate where McMinnville's, I mentioned the council at McMinnville's UGB was shown up as the ideal UGB, and I think you're right. I believe if we bring in all of the 2 or 3 different other strategic partners into this, and we sit down together, that we could probably come up with a real good solution. So thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else like to speak to the council? If not, we'll move right on across and then. Oh, Dave. I was just looking at you. You're going to come over. You got the camera pointed in the right direction. So, Dave, go ahead and introduce yourself and state your address for the record, digital record also.
Okay. Dave Adams, manager at KLYC Radio, 1100 Northeast Lafayette in McMinnville. Thanks to the efforts of American Legion Post 21, we're going to be bringing the Wall of Honor to the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum over the Memorial Day weekend. Now, this wall had an interesting beginning. It started with, I believe it was a girl in Wilsonville, started as a school project. Thought, wouldn't it be nice you hear about walls and names on walls like the Vietnam Memorial. She wanted to put a face to the names, and so she just took a piece of paper and a picture of someone who was killed in combat and put it on her school wall. And that morphed into this project where there's more than these. It's a very professionally printed wall. Each of the names has a picture by it. There's more than 5,000 names on this wall. It takes up to about a 50-foot long area. It will be in the Theater of Evergreen Aviation Museum. No admission cost, and there's more than 5,000 names on this wall. These are names of men and women who were killed in combat since 9/11, principally in Iraq and Afghanistan. It will arrive at Evergreen the afternoon of May 25th. There'll be a procession that will come into town. There'll be an opening day, formal ceremony, including a 9-round rifle volley, playing of echo taps, and the laying of the wreath. And it will be open for viewing by the public from 9 to 5 a.m. on Thursday the 26th through and including Memorial Day up to 5 p.m. Huge thank you to American Legion Post 21 in McMinnville and Evergreen. And I do have posters if anybody wants to take a poster and post it in public places or businesses or give to their employees. So that's all I have.
Okay, any questions for Dave or comments? Dave, I'd like to thank you for taking part in this. Myself as a member of Post 21 and a veteran, I think this is a very humbling experience for the people of McMinnville to see, and I'm sure the attendance will be very good, and we don't know when we'll ever be able to get this back again. So thank you very much for everything you're doing, and Legion. And
Later this summer, it will be in Newburgh.
in later summer in Newburgh?
Yes.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else that I'm not missing in a corner someplace? Okay, if not, we'll move on, right on. Counselors, in your packet again this week was the consent agenda, which consists of the minutes of the February 9th, 2016 dinner and regular meetings, Resolution 2016-22, and that was a recommendation conditionally permitted and prohibited street tree list for City of McMinnville. Resolution number 2016-23, a resolution approving the property management agreement for for city-owned property at 4600 Northeast Riverside Drive. And then there was also 5 other resolutions. If you remember, a couple months ago, we decided that what we would consider housekeeping resolutions, we put on the consent agenda to get through, but at any time, a counselor can ask for any resolution to be removed from the consent agenda to be discussed. So is there any resolution we would like removed from the consent agenda for discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion that we accept the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
So we have a move and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, let it show that the consent agenda passed the council unanimously. Okay, proclamations. We have a couple proclamations tonight. David, do you have the proclamations? And our first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these up here and I'll sign them in a minute, but we will have, first of all, I'd like Chief Scales, and maybe Dennis, maybe you both want to come forward. It's my honor tonight to read the proclamation. It's National Police Week. Whereas the Congress and the President of the United States have designated May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the week in which May 15th falls as National Police Week, and whereas the members of the Law Enforcement Agency of McMinnville play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of McMinnville, and whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the duties, responsibilities, hazards, and sacrifices of their law enforcement agency, and that members of our law enforcement agency recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence and disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression. And whereas the men and women of law enforcement agency of McMinnville unceasingly provide a vital public service, now therefore I, Richard L. Rick Wilson, Mayor of the City of McMinnville, do hereby proclaim May 15th to 21st, 2016 to be National Police Week. Upon all citizens of McMinnville, upon all patriotic, civic, and educational organizations to observe the week of May 15th through 21st, 2016 as Police Week with appropriate ceremonies and observances which all the people may join in commemorating law enforcement officers, past and present, who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens. I further call upon all citizens of McMinnville to observe May 15, 2016 as Peace Officers Memorial Day in honor of those law enforcement officers who through their courageous deeds have made the ultimate sacrifice and service to their community and have become disabled in the performance of duty. And let us recognize and pay respects to the survivors of our fallen heroes. In witness thereof, I have unto here set my hand and cause the official seal of the City of McMinnville to be affixed this 10th day of May, 2016. Dennis. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Rich, and I will go ahead and get my signature on this. And I just want you to both know how proud the City Council and citizens of McMinnville are of the great job that your staff is doing and protects that pass that on. So we're very, very proud. Where's Mr. Bishop?
Right in front of you, right in front of you.
To the right.
To the right.
What are you doing? You're supposed to be over there. And I'm not wearing an orange. She didn't rush it.
It's green.
I'm looking for you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Another proclamation. This is a proclamation for National Public Works Week, which is May 15th through the 21st of 2016. Whereas 2016 marks the 56th annual National Public Works Week, and this year's theme is Public Works Always There. And whereas our community depends on public works for clean water, safe streets, parks and buildings, well-functioning sanitary sewers, and reliable power, all of which are vital importance to the health, safety, and economic well-being of our citizens and businesses. And whereas the employees of McMinnville Water and Light and the city's engineering, building, public works, and wastewater departments are always there and always ready. And whereas it is the public interest for McMinnville citizens, business owners, civic leaders, and youth to gain an understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in their daily lives. Now therefore, I, Richard L. Rick Olson, Mayor of the City of McMinnville, do hereby proclaim the week of May 15th to 21st, 2016 as National Public Works Week in the City of McMinnville, and I call upon all citizens, business leaders, and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing and maintaining our public works infrastructure, and to recognize the contributions our public work employees make every day to our health and welfare. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the official seal of the City of McMinnville to be affixed this 10th day of May, 2016. And I don't see anybody from City Water. As I sign this, Michael, I just want to know you can pass this on to your coworkers at City Water and Light. I think if we look at our wastewater treatment and our power and our water and everything that Public Works does, we're very fortunate in McMinnville to have excellent electrical rates, the excellent sewer rates, and everything that we have compared to what other cities are going through. So wish your staff at City Water and Light very well for the past. Sir?
You all should have an invitation to our barbecue, which is next week, so hope to see you there.
Next Wednesday, is it?
Next Wednesday.
Put that on your calendar.
Just before
10th
budget
annual,
meeting.
10th annual.
Exactly. We'll treat you right.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, well, now is the time when we have planning commission interviews, and we have 2 planning commission interviews tonight. And our applicants, and let me get out all my paperwork here. Go down through my thing is hanging up here.
Got a ways to go. It's page 94.
94. What's there? Okay, we have 2 applicants tonight, and gee, one of these names looks really familiar right off the bat. Does that name look pretty familiar to you, Martha? I wonder who that could be. What we like to do during these interviews is we have 2 applicants, Eric J. Berg, and we have Nanette Periski. And so what we'll do is let's start with alphabetized with, so Ms. Berg, and what we'd ask you to do, or Mr. Berg, is if we can get the other one, if we can go ahead for just step out and get Nanette Periski. Is she here? Yeah, if we can get you to step outside while we do our other one, please, and then we'll call you right back in.
This way. Because if you put out there, we just echo everything out there, so then, Eric, you'll get to hear everything. Eric.
Okay, we're ready. Come on up, Eric. Come on right up here. And the way this will work is we have about 8 general questions. They won't take very long. And so what we'll do is, I think the council all read your application. And so what we will do is we will start with those questions. I'll start down with Larry. And Larry, you can ask one of the questions from the list, or you can pick any other question you might like to ask.
Okay, well, I'm just going to start with the first one. I think it's important. What do you believe is the most important role of the Planning Commission, and how would you promote this role as a planning commissioner?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I was not aware until about an hour ago that this was a public forum and public open audition. I feel like I'm trying out for the Wiz in high school or something. I've been reflecting on a statement. So I moved here in 2004. And I remember at that time there was an editorial piece that said something along the lines of "Keep McMinnville, McMinnville," and it was for a different political reason, and I didn't really understand it at the time. But since I've lived here now since then, so closing on 12 years, I've never lived anywhere longer, even my hometown in Pennsylvania, than here. And I think that I am certainly no expert in land use projects or assessments, but I do know the importance of maintaining both continuity of what a city provides and looks like and is in essence, but also being progressive enough to not get sort of caught up in nostalgia. I think those things you need to have both of those things in concert. So for me, I would like to think that what I could bring is, I've seen McMinnville grow in 12 years in ways that both complement our shared nostalgia for what McMinnville means and is, but we've used our land, our city, in ways that I think shine above many of our neighboring compatriots and cities. And I would just like to bring that sort of mantra or continue that mantra for the city. I would certainly have a lot to learn, though, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Kelly.
Having been a resident of McMinnville, what do you see are the strengths of the community? Conversely, what do you see are the weaknesses?
Ooh. Well, I think certainly the benefit of community, and I think in a small community, or one in which people's voices can be heard, and I think that's a double-edged sword. Some wheels are squeakier than others, and I think that's where transparency is important, but also leading with a sense of compassion and listening. And not being, in my experience, people don't listen enough, and I think that it's a hard skill, and I think that's both on the individual level, but I think that's organizationally too. And I think the benefit of community is that ideally we are democracy, representative or otherwise, and people should be able to get up here and let you know what they think, and then it's up to the community to respond. Certainly, I think some voices are louder than others, but democracy is messy, so you just roll with it.
Good.
Thank you, Eric.
Kevin, I'm going to wait you for last. Let's go down, Alan. Let's go down to you.
Okay. Well, you mentioned listening as a skill.
Yeah.
It is. How about other assets or training or skills that you might bring into this commissioner?
Yes, so I have what I like to consider a Renaissance career. My mother would disagree and say I'm aloof, but I've had about 6 to 8 years. I haven't done the math. I'm an English major, so in the winemaking and the local winery industry. And I'm presently I'm the teacher at the Marion County Juvenile Detention Center, teaching Measure 11 felons to appreciate Steinbeck. And in those two different roles, I've had leadership roles in all of my endeavors, and it does come down to listening, and it comes down to proper delegation, and it comes down to empowering others. I don't think that there is any good leadership in a top-down approach, and I like to believe that I am good at not only listening, but helping to establish plans, delegating responsibilities, and holding people account, including myself. And I don't think that good leadership comes from a sense of, I don't know, I guess propriety. I think it's a shared honor and privilege when you're doing something that's collective and And that's how you get people to rise to the challenge. And I think that that's one of my best skills. I was a department chair. I'm currently in an administrative program. And so I think I have those skills to bring people together and to come to consensus. Thank you.
Okay, Remy.
Nice to see you. What do you see as the top 3 planning issues that'll be facing McMinnville over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, man. And this is, I will tell you, this is probably the thing I'm least prepared for. I don't even know if I can see that far into my own future, let alone, 5 years is a long time. But what I like to see is, I think expanding, I've looked through the urban growth plan, and I like seeing that idea of expanding beyond 3rd Street, and that's been happening. And I think that there is a lot to be gained from that. I think that's what sustained this city through a recession when others didn't have similar plans. I work in a former town that was right in the heart of wine country and didn't seize that moment, and they lack that economic boost. So for me, I don't like personally. I don't like over planning. I don't think we need to plan beyond our urban growth boundary or try to add to it as much. I think we have a lot to develop. But I think simplicity is key, and following the business community tangential to what people need as far as resources. As much as we have business needs, people like their trees too, and I think that needs to be considered. So I don't have any specific plans, but I think I know what I'd like to see in my head. If I could paint a Bob Ross painting poorly, I think I'd know what I'd want to maintain and what I'd want to grow.
Hey, Scott.
As a commissioner, there are times in which the city policies, ordinance requirements may force you to make a decision that is unpopular with the neighborhood residents in which a particular development project is located. Would you have difficulties in making such a decision, and how would you deal with such a situation?
That's a good one. You can't please all the people all the time. I think that I've learned, people tend to say that they want things based on facts and compromise, and then when they don't get their way, they don't care about the facts and they wish you hadn't compromised. And so that's a great contradiction in our political system, and I think it's human nature. But I do think that what people want to know is that their best interest really was considered, and that it's authentic. If they feel like they're being patronized, then you're never going to get anywhere. But certainly decisions, that's why we have a representative system. Decisions need to be made that some people aren't going to like, but really is the best for the community. I think doing things like canvassing and getting the all media outlets and social media on board and using those resources is imperative. I think getting younger people involved is certainly imperative because they have the energy. But I think to be afraid of any negative kickback you'd be in status quo. You'd never get anything done. I think you have to be willing to. It's part of listening. You also have to be able to listen to criticism and not take it personally. I think that's the other thing. I learned that in teaching. I'd take my work home all the time if a kid didn't like my lesson, and then I realized, you know what? But 36 others did maybe, or I tried my best. I have another day, or So I think you can't take it personally. You do your best. You explain it. You're transparent and you're authentic. And I think that's the best you can. If anyone wants more than that, they're blood from a stone, I think.
Thank you. Council President Jeffries.
This question may have been asked in a different context, or you may have answered it already, but why do you want to become a member of this commission?
I see it as, I mean, for everything that's been happening, and maybe I'm naive and maybe I don't fully understand the context of the commission, but it seems to me to be a commission that, since I've been here, has done quite a lot to make me want to be here and be a resident of McMinnville. My daughter's here. I don't want to move back to Pennsylvania anytime soon. I fell in love when I moved here from Pennsylvania to work in the wine industry. 3rd Street sold it for me, and that was when there were still vacant storefronts. Places came in and out. It was kind of dynamic in terms of what was happening. It was still finding its momentum. And now, as things are going out and spreading, I feel like we are in this boom, this bubble of prosperity that not everyone else really is enjoying across the country, or even in Oregon, or even within our county. And I feel like it's a civic responsibility to contribute and to be part of the system, be part of the system that helps build that progress. So really, for me, this is just me wishing to exercise my civil responsibility.
Thanks.
Great. I guess I'll finish up with a question. I guess my question is there anything you'd like to tell us about you that maybe has something to do with we didn't ask, or that we should know when we make our decision what kind of planning commissioner, whether we want you or the other candidate, that we might want to know?
I'd love to tell you that I used to be Chuck E. Cheese for my first job, but I don't think that's going to help me in this particular situation. No, I think without having known, I mean, I have a resume, and I know there's not much to put on there. I do think that I am a quick study. So I might not have a resume that is land use based, but I certainly have the drive to pick that up and take the ball and roll with it. And I think I have both the entrepreneurial business acumen as well as the public service side acumen and experiences that make me a good representative for a lot of different constituencies. And so I'll just maybe put.
Do we have any other questions we'd like to add up front?
Rick, just Scott, any questions you would have of us? I know we've been able to kind of put you on the hot seat, and anything that you would like to ask of us as it relates to this opportunity.
I have done my research, I think, and I know it's good etiquette to have a question ready, but I don't think I do. I'm actually thinking about my lesson tomorrow.
Okay, now, fortunately, you get to stay in, since you went first, you get to stay in the room.
Oh.
And listen to the other person.
Great.
So, thank you very much, and you can just stay here if you'd like, and because we'll be deliberating after we hear the other applicant.
Okay.
So,
Well, I appreciate the time for the consideration.
thank you very much. Good evening, Nanette. Why don't you go ahead, and what we'll ask you to do is sign down, and if we can have you both state your name and your address for the record, and then also sign in, please.
Okay, will do. My name is Nanette Periski. I live at 1505 Northeast 9th Avenue in McMinnville.
Okay, as you're signing in, Nanette, the way we do this, we have some pre-written questions, and the counselors may go by the questions. They may go by a question of their own, and but we'll have a few questions we'll ask you, then you'll have a chance to wrap up in front of us. So what I'd like to do this time is start with Alan. Alan, why don't we start with you with a question for Nanette?
Okay. You've been in almost 20 years in the city of McMinnville.
Yes.
What do you see as the strengths of the community?
The strengths of the community.
Any weaknesses also?
And the weaknesses. Goodness. Well, the strengths are just the vibrance of the community and the planning thus far that the community has done in the city. I'm a little nervous. You'll have to excuse me. It's really important to me, so. I'm not sure about the weaknesses.
Well, maybe there's no weaknesses.
Maybe there aren't any.
Okay, let's move right on ahead then. Why don't we go with you, Remy?
Okay, so as a commissioner, there are times in which the city's policies and ordinance requirements might force you to make a decision that is unpopular with neighborhood residents. How would you deal with a situation such as that?
Well, in my daily routine at work, I'm constantly having to explain rules and policies to people that don't like them. The best thing to do would be to listen intently on what people are what their worries are and their concerns, and then try to work with them and see if, we would have to adhere to rules and policies, but explain them to them in a way they may understand how it would benefit them. Thank you.
Okay, Scott, let's move on down to you.
Nanette, what do you believe is the most important role of the planning commission, and how would you promote this role as a planning commissioner?
The most important role. I admit I haven't done a whole lot of homework, so it's just to be involved in the community and be an integral part of what's going on in the community.
Thank you.
Why don't we, let's go with you, Kelly.
Okay, what do you see are the top 3 planning issues facing McMinnville in the next 5 to 10 years?
The top 3 planning issues. I understand there's an affordable housing task force being developed. I would definitely think affordable housing is a huge issue, especially finding places to put the housing. Top 3, that's one. Yeah. So, just living in McMinnville from day to day, the growth is definitely a big issue. My son is going to PSU, and he'll be graduating with his MERT next month, and I'm constantly picking his brain about urban and regional planning and stuff, and yeah, growth. You can't predict the future. And the planners do their best to try to compensate for growth, but I would say that's another big one. 2? Go one more. I'm drawing a blank here, Kelly. Sorry. Like I said, I'm a little nervous, so.
Take a stab. Anything.
Yeah.
You can come back to that. We'll move on.
Can I
She
move
come
on?
through
Yeah.
and we can come
Thank
back
you.
to that. So
Try to think
let's
of
move
that.
down to you, Larry.
All right. Why do you want to become a member of the Planning Commission, and what specific things are your strengths that you can contribute there?
Well, why do I want to be on the Planning Commission? I've lived in this vibrant community since 1996. I'd like to be more a part of it, get more involved. I believe that, working at the Housing Authority for close to 18 years, there's not a lot of planning involved, but I do believe that I could provide some valuable insight on the committee, the experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Kevin, your turn.
Trying to see here. Do you have any questions for us, I guess? I think you've exhausted the questions we have on the list. So.
Yeah. The questions I would have is, what do you look for when looking for a member of the Planning Commission?
You want to go ahead, Council
I
President?
posed the
answer
question.
that?
I guess I should.
Yeah, you have the answer. You posed the question, Mr. President.
question with a question.
Put you on the spot.
You actually hit on one already that I think is really valuable, is that you have an understanding of laws and statutes and the rules that bind us. And as being on the Planning Commission, having a respect for that process is incredibly important. Every decision that you make could be challenged by the council as well as by Land Use Board of Appeals. And in McMinnville in particular, we're a community of people who are quite savvy and advocate very strongly for themselves and their communities. That is more and more likely. So having a foundation in laws and in the rules is incredibly important.
Okay.
Another thing I can think of is the one that you actually mentioned was being engaged in the community, having a real feel for McMinnville. And if you've been around McMinnville, it's a great town. The reason why I love McMinnville is there's so many unique communities within McMinnville.
Yeah.
We all feel part of this town, but we all also have our neighborhoods and the different feels, and being engaged with what's going on in the city at large is important.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two for me.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got
Sure,
one other
Scott.
piece.
Okay.
You know, from a council perspective, the Planning Commission really does the heavy lifting when it
Okay.
comes to looking at land use issues and the laws. And they spend a lot of time researching. They have public hearings where the dialogue is really going on. We take really good minutes of that, and then many times those things will come onto the council, and we really look towards the Planning Commission to have done their job so that when it comes to us, then we're prepared. And we will scour the minutes and your recommendations as we move forward. And so, to be very honest, you save the council a tremendous amount of time and efforts in what ultimately many times comes to us. And so that's another really, I think, important piece.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
we work hand in hand to be able to fulfill that aspect.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Alan, do you have another question
I
or
do,
comment?
real quick one, Mayor.
Sure.
Nanette, this may be right in your wheelhouse for this
Okay.
answer, okay? So in your years at working with the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, what kind of talents or skills have you learned in light of our need for affordable housing? And how would that translate onto a planning commission?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the correlation with, if the Planning Commission would be able to be involved in the task force or not, but my experience with the Housing Authority is, I stated before, constantly having to relay rules and regulations and policy to my clientele on a daily basis. Going to meetings, sitting in boards, explaining things there too. Offering suggestions, and it's definitely really changed significantly since I started working there as far as the need. It's just incredible how the rents are increasing and people just can't find a place to live. So I would hope that I could relay my experience over to the Planning Commission and be of great assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to wrap up just with Nanette with just basically one question.
Okay.
What would you say, with all your strengths and weaknesses you have, what would you say would be the number one skill that you see you could bring to the Planning Commission?
My organizational skills, and I love to do research.
Do you do research a lot as a part of your job?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, any more, Larry? Anybody on my left? Anybody on my right? Well, you can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you very much, Nanette. And so we'll move on with this. So, counselors, we do have, we've had two very good candidates come in front of us tonight. Unfortunately for Ward 3, we only have one position open at this time. So I'd like to hear a little discussion around the council, and Kevin will keep you as council president to the last. So why don't we start with you, Larry, little discussion about what your feelings are and your comments are.
Well, I'm very pleased with both candidates. I'm impressed with both candidates. They have a totally different perspective of where they're coming from and their approach, and I like both of them. And so right now I'm a little bit torn, because even though they're kind of two totally different individuals and have two different perspectives, they're both very important and very useful. So you're going to make me think. Right now I don't have a preference of one over the other.
Okay, Kelly, let's move down to you.
I was impressed with both candidates. They do come from a different perspective and certainly different background for both of them. I'm a little hesitant to put forward a name right at this point in time, but generally speaking, I felt like Nanette might have had a little more on point in some of her observations from what I would consider a planning commission perspective.
Okay, let's go down to you, Remy.
You took me by surprise, Mr. Mayor.
I know it. Do that once in a while.
Well, what I liked hearing from both candidates was the focus on community. I don't want to be redundant in saying that, but it's true that it's nice to have multiple applicants for this position, and applicants that come from two different points of view, but that are doing it out of or here because of their love of community. I know Mr. Berg, and so I've had the opportunity to see his work ethic, and I've known him the length of time that he's lived here, so, you know, with that in mind, and also with his answer to the question number 5 of what do you want, why do you want to become a member of this commission? His answer is civic responsibility. To me, that's something that whenever we've had people come before us that I've always looked for I've always waited to hear that answer, and it always is something that speaks strongly to me. I think it's, I'm also very impressed with Mrs. Perisky's passion, and I honestly believe that both candidates would make a good commissioner in this right, and I am, those are my thoughts.
Okay. Councilor Rudin.
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to what Larry said, two different perspectives for sure. And I like them both. I appreciate both of them being here. I'm drawn to Nanette because of her experience with the Housing Authority. As we're starting to get serious about affordable housing, I like her perspective on that. That's the only thing that I see that's that much over the other candidate.
Okay. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some thoughts that I put down. Mr. Berg loves education, teaches that, is a teacher, long-term resident, listener. I really enjoyed the fact that he feels like he's a learner. He shared a lot of things about life is a learning process. Nanette talked about, I appreciated her being involved at the housing, Yamhill County Housing, and the perspective that brings. Again, another long-term resident of the community. I like the thought of her organizational skills and her research. And, you know, as we talk about these positions, it is all about understanding the laws that pertain to land use and being able to take that information and disseminate it with a lot of input coming in that is emotional sometimes. And I think both of them have the ability to do that. So I feel equally that they bring different skill sets to the table, but those skills that they bring would be appropriate in every sense of the word. So I'm split right now. Two good candidates.
Council President.
Again, I want to thank both candidates for taking the time to apply and to go through this obviously uncomfortable experience. I actually interviewed to be on the council for the first time, and it seems like it wasn't that long ago, and it was pretty nerve-wracking. So I understand how that goes. I can't remember a time when we've interviewed two candidates that were so different, but that had their own strengths in such a way. I will tell you right now, I'm really leaning towards Nanette. I think that her background at the Housing Authority is going to be a good foundation for her. And the needs that we have going forward, I think she has the right skills for that. I really liked, forgive me, I'm going to sneak up here to check the name. Eric, as a former educator and another Western Oregon grad, I commend you for what you do, and I know the skills that it takes to be a teacher and to think on your feet and to work a room and I think he would be very comfortable up on the dais and engaged in the public. But I was just a little concerned with some of the answers that he gave, especially when you're talking about planning and long-term goals, and I don't know if it was just the nerves or just, I don't know, but I just wasn't really in love with the answers that he gave. It didn't seem like that was something he had really considered, and that is paramount to that job.
Even though I don't get a vote on this, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what my thinking were. And I guess I have a question, and I thought, Kevin, you summed it up perfectly. I don't ever remember I've been mayor almost 8 years, and the time before I was 12 years I was on the council before that, where we've had two such diverse applicants with different backgrounds, which kind of puts me in a whole different situation. But a question, I don't know, David, this would maybe a question more for you. As I look at Nanette and I look at her employer and everything, and being a member of the Planning Commission, a lot of things we're going to deal with from a planning commission on affordable housing could be co-sponsored by the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, or they can be done that. What position does that, if we were to select her, what position does that put her in as having Yamhill County Housing Authority as a employer?
Generally speaking, if someone who is your employer is the applicant for a matter that's coming before the planning commissioner would be needing to declare a conflict of interest and not participate in that decision that's being made. There was a period of time when I was a city abandoned planning commissioner and county council in Coos County. And if any matters of Coos County had come before the planning commission at that time, that was what was understood. There's so to the extent that you're going to have those things coming before her on the planning commission, she would have to step down from those.
Thank you, David. And I think, council, that was just one of my concerns, that as we work with both Housing Authority, Yamhill County, and other potential organizations or developers that are going to co-sponsor something or do something with Housing Authority of Yamhill County, what position that would put her in from a standpoint of a planning commission member, either just whether it be just an ex parte contact, which is fine, or if there would really be a perceived or a real conflict. That was one of my concerns. As far as Eric goes, Berg goes, a couple things he said to me that I guess, Kevin, unlike you, that I picked up on is, at first he talked about expanding the UGB, but then he thought there was other ways of doing things without expanding the UGB. too much, and I like that. But the things that I picked up mostly, not only the sense of community, was things he said about being an active listener, being about people aren't necessarily going to agree, and you're going to make somebody always mad. But if you work with diverse sides and different people, you can come up with good solutions sometime. And I think it goes back to what Mr. Davis said earlier on, that if, as we look at expansion of the UGB for affordable housing and other issues, that we bring opponents in earlier and work with them. So I don't, well, I should say fortunately, unless there's a split, fortunately, I don't get a vote. But either one, I think, is a great candidate. I do have a concern with Nanette just regarding the potential issues with a planning commission member being an employee of Housing Authority. But I think that can be easily remedied by what our attorney said, so.
And Mayor, I think you could probably ask Doug to see if there has been any conflict where the county has come before the planning commission in the last 5 years that he can remember. I would say
I
that
don't
there
know
are very
about
few.
Housing Authority, Doug?
None that immediately come to mind, no.
Yeah, so.
I would.
And
It
some-
is just something I wanted to bring up, because I think, and then I want the applicant to understand too, that as we start talking more about affordable housing and the partnerships we're building, that possibility exists where she may have to step aside and not participate in the discussions or the decision-making
Could I,
process. So Doug?
Well, my sense is that a lot of the issues that might come before you from the affordable housing side will be legislative in nature. And so the rules around conflict of interest are a little bit different, a little bit more relaxed. And frankly, we look for people with expertise on those issues to be part of those conversations. If it were a quasi-judicial issue, I very much agree with our city attorney that in that case, they have to recuse themselves, step away, and not participate. But I think that's.
No, and I agree, and Doug makes a good point distinguishing between the legislative actions that the planning commission takes and the quasi-judicial ones.
Okay. All right, council, it's up to you. So I'll entertain.
Mayor, I'd like to
Yes,
propose a
Kevin.
motion that we appoint Nanette to the planning commission for Ward 3.
Second.
I second.
We have a motion by the council president and a second by Councilor Menke. Do we have any others? If not, I'll entertain do we have the motion in the second? Is there any question? No question? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Let it show that the vote passed on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Drapkin voting in the negative. Councilor Drapkin voting in the negative. So, thank you both for coming in front of us tonight, and we will go ahead and move on with the rest of our agenda. But Eric, stay in touch, because there's definitely other things that are going to be coming up. And we might even have an at-large position too. We don't know. So stay in touch. Yep, I got right here on my book. Okay, the next thing, we have one presentation tonight. That's by Jim Galba and his request to amend the Northeast Gateway Plan Development Overlay. I know Jim's been in front of us a couple times in this regards the use of his property on 12th Street at the east end of Lafayette Avenue. It's a concrete tilt-up building.
Can we take a quick break since we've been going through?
No. Okay, Jim, while you're getting ready, we're going to take about a 3 or 4 minute break. And then you can come on forward.
4-hour
Or you
break.
can come forward now and sign in if you'd like to.
What does Rick looked at me and said, let's see if we can do this.
So what was going on?
Well, we did the shortcut, but it didn't like it. So we have to use the
if you're
No,
gonna
but,
rent a
no, I'm
property
saying-
and you know that marijuana is the most totally arcane legislated thing that we've been talking about for at least a couple of years now, I would go check out and see how that place was zoned. And it was zoned in a manner that was restrict what you were doing. And you didn't go check, evidently. The heck with the property owner. He
You
knows
guys weren't
probably
talking
that.
about marijuana back then. It wasn't legal. It is now.
When did you lease the property?
In 2013.
Well, the zoning was in place at that point in time. You could have checked it out. I know I certainly checked it out when I was trying to buy a property and it had mixed use.
Mr. Mayor, for the sake of
Kelly.
time, I think we've heard his side of it, and
I
if there's
agree.
two proposals in front of us, I think we should decide what we want to do and
I think the
move on.
proposal is we have to either to, if we want to go through the process, the land use hearing process, that's one thing we can do, and then we could either have staff.
Doesn't sound like
instigate it, or we
there's the
can have
desire of the
the-
council to
It
do
Well,
that.
that's the
so-
one thing, and then the other thing is we have a motion, I mean, we have a thing in front of us, and that's the other option we have.
I think it's the
Just,
other option.
just real quick, there's one thing that the council can do, and we're asking you to do, is do you want to make a motion to initiate amending the Northeast Gateway Planned Development Overlay? That is the question being asked of the council tonight. Do you wish to initiate a motion amending the Northeast Gateway Planned Development Overlay?
Could we just maybe like do an up or down vote on that?
It's a motion, so
I move
you move that we what, Kelly, do
that
not
we
accept?
not initiate a plan for a change in the overlay.
Okay, so then if one wants to be initiated, Mr. Galba would have to initiate.
And I'll second it.
You have a motion second? Any questions called for? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Let it show no, did I hear no nays? Let it show that it's passed the council unanimously.
What was the second option that you said?
That you would, if you want to go through the process of initiating a zone change, then he has to actually go through that process and pay the application fee and everything, correct? That's
And there'd be a
correct.
public hearing process
In
and,
front of the planning commission,
I see.
and not in front of us. And then the planning commission, I guess then it could be appealed to us if we so elect to have it. But you'd go through the process to the planning
Actually,
commission.
Mr. Mayor, if I could
Sure,
clarify,
Don.
it would actually be a recommendation of the planning commission to this body. This body make the last call on any action to amend that ordinance. This is the body that adopted the ordinance.
Okay, but the planning, if you want a public hearing to go, then the planning commission could come back to us and say the exact same thing, but it would go in front of the planning commission.
But they would hold a public hearing process and be
Actual
adequately
public hearing.
noticed so that the public would have the opportunity to come and participate in that process.
And once we go into that, it is actually not a remand, it is actually, then the recommendations are just made to us.
Correct, because it'd be a legislative
It's
action.
legislative action, and not a
Correct.
quasi judicial action.
Correct.
Okay. So Jim, that's what you can do. You can actually request, and staff is glad to tell you how you go about doing that,
All right.
doing that process.
Guess we're done, right?
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. This is the next item of business. The next item of business is a staff update on the school district tennis courts. So, Martha, I'm going to turn that one over to you. I understand staff has some additional information for us.
We do. This is a follow-up to a presentation by Mr. Cole Risden at the last council session, at which two requests came out of the staff on that. One was for the staff to go back and get in written confirmation what classes were being held at the tennis courts at 11th and Cowles. That response is in your package inside my memo. So with that, the second request that was made by Mr. Cole Risden at that council presentation was for the council to either rescind or to uphold the staff's ruling that the tennis courts did constitute a school facility.
Okay, let's start with discussions. Scott, I'd like to start with you on the discussions on this one.
Okay. Give me just a second to get to,
Sure.
Rose, can you pull up my memo where it gives the actual language, please?
Page 4.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, we did get written confirmation from the school district that there are specific classes being held on that site from a PE standpoint, and also the tennis class or the tennis team is practicing on that location. So we do have written verification that that is an educational site. Is that correct?
That is correct, Counselor Hare.
Okay.
And the specific response is in quotes at the bottom, and if you could scroll up to let them see the entire one.
And so,
And that was the information also provided verbatim to OHA. They just gave us the exact same thing they gave to OHA in March.
and so, pursuant to our long discussion at our last council meeting, I think for many of us, the time and effort and money that's been put out is a very difficult thing that came before us. As we deal with the issues of marijuana, it's kind of been a moving target a little bit as the state's trying to get their hands around the rules and laws that pertain to that. We've done our very best, but what we have here is indeed, we have a location that's within a school district or a school class that fits everything that we have done. And so my thought right now is, we talked about writing a letter that showed that, we had initially given clearance because we weren't aware of the classes being there, but indeed classes are there. Allow that to go before the state, and they do what they need to do from that perspective. So those would be my initial thoughts on that which came before us.
Okay. Let's go down to you, Alan. Your feelings, your comments, questions?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I read the language here. I understand that in my mind, but when my heart's speaking, I'm thinking that it's not education going on there that's should factor into this. We gave a building permit to them, and we actually finalized it, I do believe. And so I think we should take another step of rectifying it, whatever we can do.
Okay, Remy?
This is an unenviable situation. I think that it's important that there is always a truly compelling reason to assess or reassess a criteria. In this case, this would be so individually specific to the circumstance that I don't think that the criteria really needs or calls for a reevaluation. It makes sense to have a criteria that is in line with OHA. The answer that the school system gave us that there are classes there is part of the criteria. The tennis team meets there. It doesn't matter. It's it's extracurricular. It's not part of it. So it's kind of unnecessary. But there are classes there. I don't think that the city needs to reevaluate its criteria. But that said, I'm also, as Councilor Rudin is, I also understand that there is a wrong that is happening here. And however that came to be, it is wrong. It is wrong that this individual was granted all this licensing, not because the city did anything wrong, but that then went forward, made an investment, and now is going to suffer the consequences of that. He's been denied by OHA, and while I won't pretend to be able to see into the future, I can only imagine he'll be similarly denied by OLCC. So what do you do with that? How do you not, how do you hold to a rule that is in a good place and is there for a reason, and keep a criteria, but also have enough space in what you do on a day-to-day basis to understand when something is playing out in a way that is wrong and through no fault of the person that's involved. But similarly to our other circumstances, now shows that this is not permitted. So I don't think we should rewrite the criteria. And if we don't rewrite the criteria, then the tennis courts remain as part of that school system. But there is absolutely something that is very wrong in how this is unfolding.
Okay, thanks, Remy. Larry?
Well, I'm a little confused too, because, we submitted the exclusive zone, and yet the school sent their information somewhere. Am I wrong on that? That the school, did OHA get information from the school as to what,
OHA will do their own assessment because they have to uphold Oregon state law, because Oregon has boundaries around schools as well. So they do their own, we do ours own. So whether or not we would have had language in there prohibiting medical facilities around a school, that has no bearing. OHA would still enforce Oregon law.
And that's the way I read the very last statement in your memorandum here from OHA. It says that even if you are issued a registration, it's determined that the school is located within 1,000 feet, OHA must revoke your registration. So it's like, do we really have any control over it? Even though we shouldn't have issued maybe the license in the first place, we have no control over it because we got overruled by the state. So I see that there's nothing we can do as long as these standards hold up with OHA.
Okay, Kelly?
Well, I have looked at the minutes, the recording of this meeting. It's a tough one. I don't know. It seems to me that the use of the tennis courts is really pretty negligible when you look at the entire year. And I tend to agree with Larry that kindly it's up to OHA. I'm not entirely sure there's a whole lot we can do with it unless we choose to rewrite the ordinance for whatever reason.
Okay,
So-
Kevin?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the memo's solid. I think we're doing the right thing. I think this is a bum deal for this guy, but the thought keeps going through my head. Call before you dig. You got to get a permit. You got to get these things in place. And I mean, he decided to invest money in this before he had that permit in hand, and that was his decision. And it didn't work out.
I don't think that's the way
Not
it
the
works.
case. No, that's not the way
It's
it
that
works.
Have
you
the
have
approval.
to, you have to make the investment. It's kind of a backward setup with
OHA won't
OHA. You
license
have
you
to make
without
the investment
being
in order to
compliant
get the
ready.
approval.
Say that again?
OHA will, you have to have a compliance review. So until you've had all your compliance review, OHA will not license you.
Well, that stinks.
Yeah.
I get that, but it's still, he understood that going into this. The rules haven't changed on him, you know what I mean? Like, he would have had to make all those investments. That was a business decision that he made, knowing that there's a chance that he wouldn't have it at the end.
Mayor.
I think at the time, that it probably looked really good that he would, but that's just the nature of this business. And I mean, I do feel bad for the guy, but at the same time, I'm like, this is the way the law is, and we
If you look at
are in a
that,
position to change it.
Excuse me, Kevin.
Go ahead.
Well, even the OHA statement says 1,000 feet of a school. Not tennis courts, a school. Or another dispensary. So are they defining a school as a place where instruction takes place?
Any activity.
Any
takes
activity.
place.
Right.
And if you will, in the memo, you'll see the criteria on what defines a school facility as outlined out the OHA. That's the criteria they use, A through E, on how they determine what is a school facility.
Got it.
You know, I guess, once again, I just want to make sure I go on record as claiming an ex parte contact. As you all know, that I've done that the last 2 meetings because I've done some technical consulting for Mr. Risden. I think there's, whatever we do, OHA has the ultimate decision. I believe that we have the ability as a city to rescind this and put it back in OHA's lap if they still make the same, and this goes to what Councilor Rudin said. If we rescind that, OHA could definitely look at what they got from the school district and still deny it for the exact same reason. My big concern with this is goes back to a lot with what Councilor Drabkin said. I personally asked somebody from the school district before we asked staff to get this, actually before we had our last council meeting, and I was told by the same person that told, on the phone, that told Mr. Risden that is not used for curriculum or curricular activity, period. Now, I don't know what the school, I know now we have it in writing and they say it is. But I just think this person, I don't know what to do about it other than, because I think he was wronged. That's just my opinion. I think he was totally wronged. And being that he's within 75 feet, I think, of about 60 feet of the edge of the boundary or 75 feet of the edge of the boundary. My other concern is that I'm not so sure if we can do anything. But if we really feel psychologically that if we did something that wronged that person, we can't tell OHA not to deny him or not to approve it. But if OHA does their independent background, like they stated in Martha's memo, and they stated, if we rescind it and OHA looks at it and says, well, that's too bad, we're still going to keep it, there's not a lot we can do.
I do fear, or not fear, but I am conscious of a snowball effect with this. What other properties are used on a inconsistent basis for student education? Is the Air Museum a school?
They have a high school as a curriculum there.
Right. So there's a lot of kind of far-reaching implications however this is addressed.
But Dave, wouldn't that be covered because it is a place where children gravel, the water park and everything?
Again, it wouldn't, not because of the water park. There's no boundary drawn around Wings and Waves. My understanding is when the city established this,
It's
the Aviation Museum.
So
Because of the
so we do have the
curriculum that's provided there.
1,000-foot boundary.
And we don't have any clearly defined standards in our ordinance that says it has to be more than 4 weeks of instruction a year or more than 8 weeks of instruction a year. If the council wanted to adopt that, it would certainly give staff clearer guidance to apply when reviewing these things. But OHA is not, they don't have a similar, nor does OLCC at this point, have any similar distinction. So they remain free to interpret state law as they see fit. I would caution the council too much unless you have something specific that you believe staff did in wronging Mr. Risden, and being liable to him in some way for the $250,000 that he has invested in this facility. We did inform Mr. Risden pretty much contemporaneously with the time that we discovered the existence of the tennis courts. It was before we actually gave him the permit. And what he chose to do with that information or did not choose to do with that information, and whether he chose to move forward with investing in his business venture or not after receiving that information, was completely out of the city's control. We attempted to do the right thing with him by virtue of the city's ordinance by issuing him the building permit, but at no time did we represent to him, nor should he have relied upon receiving a building permit from the city, is indicating that OHA was going to similarly rule the same way. And I'm sensitive to his issues, but if you want to put this on the city, I think you need to look at what ordinances were we applying and how did we impact it versus the decisions he made and what other third parties did.
Well, let me clarify that I was not saying that Mr. Risden was wronged by the city of
No, I'm not
McMinnville,
either.
and if
I don't
it
think
appeared that
anybody's
way,
really
my
saying.
apologies to city staff. That was not at all what I was saying. What I was saying was that in his situation, because of the order of how the events unfolded, that that he is getting caught and he's stuck in this, he got caught in this trap, and that in and of itself is wrong because he did himself no wrong. He followed all of the guidelines he was supposed to follow. He did the things he was supposed to do. So truly, my apologies to staff if it at all seemed as though I was saying he was wronged by the city. That was not at all what I was saying. I was saying that what is happening for him in this situation is wrong. And we are willing or unwillingly caught up in that process.
David, I have a question for you. I think you said the school district put this to OHA on the 15th of March. I heard the 15th of March date. Doug, there was something about the 15th of March.
It was in March. I can't give you the date. If that's important, we can go back and find it.
No, I'm just trying to understand that before that or after, it was before that.
It was on February 8th, and this is from Mr. Risden's own testimony at the
Sure.
at the council meeting the last meeting, that on February 8th, when he tried to pick up his building permit from the city initially, he was informed at that time that the tennis courts had been identified potentially as a school facility.
He was informed
Was
that
informed
before
by
he
the
picked
city.
up the permit initially?
Yep,
And that's from his own
In February.
testimony.
in February,
Yeah.
February 8th.
I don't know if we had that known to us last time.
He testified to that at the last meeting as well.
And he went forward with.
And then on February 22nd, we actually released the permit to him because we had verbally informed him previous to February 8th that it had been issued.
Okay.
It was only when he came to pick it up that we withheld it because we wanted to investigate the tennis courts, and then ultimately decided, from our standpoint, we would issue the building permit because of the verbal acknowledgement to him or informing him verbally that it had been issued. We went ahead and issued it, but he was on notice at that time, as early as February 8th, if not before, that the tennis courts had been identified as an issue, as a potential school facility that the 1,000-foot buffer would apply to. And we chose to grandfather him in, crudely use the term, from the city's permitting standpoint. And, that was but in no way did that influence OHA.
Boy, that's a tough, I think based on, David, on your last testimony, we're on the 8th, that, read that, what Mr. Risden's testimony. He wrote down.
Yeah, he indicated on February 8th, it was when he tried to pick up his permit, and I would just, I guess, give you the full timeline. I think it was January 29th, we called him and informed him that he could come in and pick up the permit. He had applied for it in early January. On February 8th, when he came in to try to then actually pick it up the next week, that's when we informed him that we could not, in fact, issue it to him because the tennis courts had been identified. He complained about that. We did an internal review process, decided we'll go ahead and release the permit to him, which he picked up on February 22nd, but informed him that there was a 1,000-foot buffer around the tennis courts as far as we were concerned. He was just getting in under the wire because we hadn't identified it until after we'd informed him we were issuing the permit.
Even if he had a permit, that didn't mean he had to start construction and start investing.
Yeah, and that's where the OHA rules that require investment before they make a decision, that's we had no control at that point when we issued the permit, whether he was going to move forward with that, conduct further investigation, get some type of a ruling in advance from OHA with regard to the tennis courts. And I think he indicated when he was here at the last meeting that he did not do that follow-up with OHA until very late in the game.
So it wasn't just a matter of, I think, David, what I hear you saying is, since we notified him that, that's what he testified, what his testimony shows, is that it just was, since we notified him on after that, before that, it really, even though, and I see where you're coming from now, and I agree with you, even though maybe the map wasn't published at that time on OHA's site, we notified them that there may be an issue with those being part of the school. And so whether the maps were there or not really don't have anything to do with it or not, because we notified him that there was an issue.
We didn't sit on any information.
Well,
As soon as they came into us, we
It wasn't a map issue at all, because we notified him that there may be an issue.
And if I would, once we notified and he knew that there was a school facility, or at least the school facility was under the possibility of discussion, it is very clear, and has been clear, in OHA regulations for more than a year, of what happens when the OHA finds out there's school facilities. And that happened early in the process. So I appreciate that we have a business owner who's going forward that will not be getting his license from OHA. But there was a decision on his point to take risk. And he made that decision, and in the hopes that it would play out. Business owners across the world take risk. In this case, it didn't work.
And I think it's probably safe to say he would have been, no matter what the other issue is, which could be an issue that he could pursue, not against the city of McMinnville, of course, but against somebody else. It wouldn't have made any difference whether OHA approved or denied him, because the tennis court, he testified with the letter and everything he got. Well, about the anonymous letter he got.
That's totally irregardless.
That's said, that doesn't have really to do with anything.
Zero bearing on
And if we lay the
if
we lay the facts out in a letter and send it off to OHA, it's not going to help.
It's not going to make a difference, because OHA is going to rule however they rule.
So what's next, Mayor?
Does he have any appeal
What's next?
process?
He does have an appeal process with OHA.
And I think he'll probably take that.
And I would say a letter could even hurt him further from us with the detailed information.
No, this is just tough. This is a tough one. David?
The only thing that I would ask is if the council, it was the council's pleasure to set some minimum standards on the number of weeks of instruction that would have to occur at a location for it to qualify as a school, some threshold number there that we could put into the ordinance, or, provide some greater instruction on this. That could have a bearing on how the city applies its ordinance.
But once again, it
But-
will have no bearing on
It would have no one else,
It-
that's right.
It would not.
And that's why I guess I'm not necessarily for doing additional work on ordinance, because it isn't gonna, we can put 4 hours, 12 hours, 6 months, but if OHA looks at their requirements and they say their requirements, it's within 1,000 feet, it's not gonna make any difference what kind of hours we put
Or
on.
how often.
Or how often.
Well, it does come up to where, Remy brought it up as field trips. Let's say the school district wanted to take a class for instructions out to Cascade Steel for learn about industrial relations, whatever, the steel process. There's a dispensary there within a couple 100 feet of
But
Cascade
it's not their
Steel.
property, I
The
think.
prop-
They don't own the
Part of the
property.
requirements is it has to be school property. So if you follow the requirements, those
Yeah.
5 requirements, that would exclude that case right there.
Yeah, see, if those were, the way I understand, if those were city tennis courts, I think it was years and years ago, we tried to purchase those tennis courts. If those were city tennis courts, then we wouldn't be city, even though they provided instruction, they wouldn't be owned by the school
What
district.
about the Evergreen Aviation?
I thought they were our city.
Don't bring that up now,
Th-
but that's
This
a
is
good
an
point.
interesting, I mean, the rules don't apply both ways. I mean, so theoretically, the school could put a module right next to a dispensary and shut it down.
Yeah,
Well, except they're within the rule, if the dispensary is there first and the school locates there later, the
Okay.
dispensary gets to stay.
Okay.
David
Yes.
did bring up one question.
But there's
Justice in the world, I guess.
I want to
is-
get through this, and then I want to go up with a question, Dave, but I want to get through this.
Well, the second criteria there is that, it's a building or physical space where students gather together on a regular basis. And I think that excludes the manufacturing facility that has occasional field trips from a city-owned facility or a museum-owned space where, classes are regularly conducted.
Wait, why are you excluding the museum?
No, I'm not. I'm
No, that's
I'm
why I
saying
want to
Cascade Steel
I want
that
to handle
hosts
the
a
museum
field
as a
trip
separate issue other than this.
is different from
It's
a
got an
tennis
umbrella.
courts or a museum where there's actual classroom instruction occurring.
Right, but which is not owned by the school district.
But again,
And
that's
that's to your point.
right.
Yeah, and
they're-
that's why I think we need to vote on this, do this one, and then we can have discussion on that, because it really doesn't have anything to do with this particular one. So I think, Commissioner, this is about the third meeting in a row now, council, we've gone through this and everything. I think we can all admit that, there definitely was something that wasn't right with this, but I don't think it was necessarily the city's, I don't think it was the city's responsibility or staff's responsibility for this, based on the testimony and what David said. The only other way this could happen, I think, is it could end up playing out in a court of law, but if it does, it does, and that's the only thing about it is, so. So what's everybody's feeling around the dais? So we have, what it is we have a motion, what I'd be asking for is a motion to uphold the staff's assessment that the school district tennis courts at 11th and Cowles should be considered a school facility under the guidelines provided by the OHA.
I would entertain that motion.
So, Kevin, we have a motion by Council President Jeffries, a second by Councilor Menke. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, let it show that it passed unanimously. Now, David, since that one's passed, one other thing before we adjourn here, because we won't go over advice and information items, is David brings up a good point about Evergreen, because they do have some of the school pathway programs out there, and some of the buildings, the Aviation Museum, some of those are considered school district classrooms.
Yeah, they do.
They do have a buffer?
I'm Danielle Clown, by the way, the infamous.
Yeah, I saw you sitting back there, Danielle.
And the reason, and the reason would be is we can get the lease agreement that they have that makes those school facilities. We'll just get the lease agreement and bring it to the council.
Yeah, so they are a buffer
Yes.
on that.
To confirm what Ms. Claus is saying, the OHA maps do show the buffer around the ESA properties
Do they
currently.
show that now?
Yes.
Okay. So that being said, anything more? We have some advice and information items. Any reports from counselors on committees and board assignments or department head reports? Do we have anything come in front of us tonight? If not, it's been a long evening with the work session. Hearing none, adjourned.